And welcome to my review of Deep Breath, the Series 8 opener. So I'm going to sort of divide this review up into sort of sections such as performance and the story itself, and other sections, well, sections maybe combined onto other things. So yeah, let's get cracking. So yeah, let's start reviewing Deep Breath.
Into darkness.
Kickstart the performances with Jenna Coleman. Now, when we last saw Clara in The Time of a Doctor in Series 7 Part 2, she didn't have much character. The only thing she had going for her was the sort of story arc of The Impossible Girl. But since she's now travelling with the 12th Doctor, she's had a revamp, a retweak, and become much more of a developed character. I know, rather shocking. I mean, the scene what really does show Jenna Coleman really pushing her sort of egomania out and sort of control freakness out is with Vastra, with the Veil scene, which is where you really do start to get a sense of Jenna Coleman's character. So it's sort of a reboot of the series, if you like, with a new Doctor and a reboot of the Companion. Now, people are seeing similarities with Clara and Sarah Jane. I have to admit and put my hand up and say, yes, I do agree with that statement, because with the third Doctor, she didn't have much character, she didn't have much going for her, only her journalism. But when Tom Baker came along, boom, she just instantly clicked with Tom Baker's Doctor. And obviously they were great friends in real life, and obviously Sarah Jane became one of the most iconic, probably the iconic classic companion. So Clara, she could possibly be the iconic new series companion, maybe. I mean, in episode 4, is it? We see her or episode 5, dressed like Elizabeth Sladen from The Time Warriors, so I can see her costume now sort of evoking Elizabeth Sladen's sort of character style, which is nice. So yeah, let's go on to the next performance, what I'd like to talk about. Okay, so the half-face man played by Peter Fernando, I think that's how you pronounce his surname. Now, I have to say, his physicality was brilliant, really making it have this sort of robotic, sort of clockwork feel to it, with the head being quite jerkish and the movement being quite sort of sharp and very sort of demanding, much like his voice. And his voice for the character was very different compared to the voices we actually heard from the waiter, because the waiter was very robotic, so obviously he's a drone. But with a half-face man, he sort of had this quite demanding and sort of very, said the dialogue very fast to give it sort of like his voice sort of system was sort of fading, so we had to say the dialogue very fast and very demanding, which was brilliantly. And the makeup for that was brilliant, but I have to say, overall his performance is fantastic. The movement, the gestures were just fantastic. Right, so now on to the Paternoster Gang. Now, the Paternoster Gang, we were sort of teased that they were returning for this series because the Doctor was going to have familiar faces around him. Now, I'm not a huge fan of the Paternoster Gang because they're not sort of true to their classic counterparts, bar Jenny and Jenny's sort of a different matter. But I have to say, they were brilliant in this. I have to say this is probably my favourite episode featuring them, because they weren't in it heavily, they weren't sort of used it, they weren't in it just for the comedy. They did provide the story, they pushed the story forward, especially with Clara. The Veil scene really did push Clara out, so they pushed some characters out of the comfort zone, especially Clara. Now, the humour itself with Strax was good. It was the right balance, because we still had this sort of darkish feel to it, but we still had the sort of light comedy element by Strax, sort of giving kids, a bit of light in the story instead of just having this dark and gloomy story. Right, so now onto the man himself, Peter Capaldi. Now, when I first saw him in the episode, people said they were instantly sold on his Doctor. For me, that wasn't really the case. He sort of became the Doctor when we saw him, when the half-faced man fell out of the skin balloon, as I like to call it, and we just see him look up. And then I sort of think, yeah, that's his I am the Doctor moment, much like when Matt Smith had the Atraxi moment on the rooftop. So I think that was his sort of signature moment. But for me, the bit where I thought he did sound like the Doctor and he's acting like his Doctor's going to be was with Clara in the TARDIS when he walked down the steps saying, "I'm the Doctor. I've made many mistakes. You know, not all of them were good," or something like that. That's a bit what sold me on him. And I mean, when he first stepped out with TARDIS and was doing the usual craziness, going, "Oh, thingy," and grumpy and all that, I didn't really think that suited his character. But you can sort of forgive it because regeneration is a lottery, basically. It's your mind sort of readjusting to what's happened. But the thing, a bit of dialogue what didn't really work for me for Peter Capaldi, possibly because it's his age. I've got nothing against him. He's a fantastic actor, but Stephen Moffat, I don't really think it was a bit out of character for Peter Capaldi to say, you know, when he was attracting the dinosaur or the T-Rex attention, going, "Oi, big sexy woman." I don't think that was Peter Capaldi. With Peter Capaldi, we sort of see the companion and Doctor relationship starting to form, especially in the restaurant scene, where I think that's when they're starting to play around with the relationship, and I think we're starting to see, you know, that the Doctor, you know, he's not the love interest, you know, and he's sort of he's inside the TARDIS with Clara, you know, or that could be a boyfriend, so he's just, you know, trying to put the idea that he's not, you know, all cuddly, especially in the hugging scene, you know, he's not there to be a boyfriend, he's sort of a grandfather sort of figure, really. So similarities with his Doctor to previous Doctors. Now, I saw a bit of the first Doctor when he was mourning the loss of the dinosaur, you know, saying shut up everyone. And I can just imagine Hartnell saying that. And I also saw the 11th Doctor because when Tracy died, he sort of took he thought very fondly of it, and Capaldi's Doctor took very fondness to that T-Rex. So I saw a bit of the sense of loss like the 11th Doctor had in Dinosaurs on the Spaceship, and he sort of had the Tom Baker quirkiness with the I'm Scottish, you know, not that Tom Baker's Scottish and that's a terrible Scottish impression, but you know, the because Tom Baker would do yes, but Capaldi's like and then we had a bit of John Pertwee with a sort of actionness, you know, doing the stunts and the horse. You know, I see a lot of John Pertwee in him, so this is fantastic. Okay, so now it's going to go on to my thoughts on the story. Deep Breath was a big risk, with risky scenes such as Strax, you know, about to attempt suicide, and of course introducing the new Doctor. The foe itself featured through the story prominently, and the length of the story gave the story time for the villain's plan to actually start to unfold. Now that leads me on to my next point. The pacing was okay, it was slow, but that's not a bad thing. Slow can be very good because it builds up to this big climactic moment, such as when the Doctor is facing the half-faced man. But I did feel like some scenes were unnecessary, but they were sort of put in, they were sort of put in the story just to fit the Blue Peter competition, especially with Strax examining Clara. I thought that was just put in just to make sure that Blue Peter device was used. Now, also, as I mentioned, you know, the villain had time to, the plans actually managed to have time to unfold, but each character involved in this story did have the right balance of screen time. They weren't sort of underused or overused. Now that leads me on to the big thing, sort of a big thing in my eyes, the title sequence. The title sequence is probably one of the most iconic things about the show. The title sequence, of course, was by a concept by a YouTuber, and it was very refreshing to see this sort of idea instead of using the standard sort of Series 7 Part 2 title sequence. I like that it actually shows that the Doctor is a Time Lord that he can travel through space and time. Just in the matter of 28 seconds, or how long the title sequence actually is, we can see that actual thing being used that there is, you know, the clock and the planet swirling round. My personal favourite bit is when the TARDIS comes through the clock face. That bit really strikes out to me, and we get to see Capaldi's attack eyebrows. Ooh, more on that later. The music itself, to go with the theme tune, seemed rather basic and rather sort of struck back without its big sort of grand orchestral feel to it. But I did sort of notice a few little hints from previous theme tunes. The main one for me, what I sort of heard, was the sort of TV movie theme tune when you sort of when it gets to the names right up until the reveal of Doctor Who. I sort of hear this sort of very grand sort of a feel to the theme tune, what sort of harks back to the TV movie. Also, the electronicness of the sort of screeching at the end of the theme tune sounded very reminiscent of the 1960s theme tune, with the sort of various screeches and stuff. And also the sort of pacing of the theme tune, did sort of feel like the 2000 theme tune with some elements in it. But also the music in general in the story was very good, and it was refreshing to see a new score of music and the retweak of the Impossible Girl theme. And I think we saw a little teaser of the 12th Doctor theme. I think someone called it Me, and that was sort of shown when he's sort of running across the roof, and he's about to escape the bedroom. I personally like that. It's quite sort of action, quite gripping, that music, and yeah, the music really did add into it, because Murray Gold was very lazy in the Matt Smith, and towards the name of the Doctor, not the name of the Doctor, the Day of the Doctor was basically reuse of I Am the Doctor and the Majestic Tale of a Madman with a Box, I think it's called, and Time of the Doctor was basically that with a few little retweaks of some music. But this saw a fresh new score, and I'm interested to see what the rest of the Series 8 soundtrack holds. I'm going to move on to the cameo. Now, this may be a spoiler, but you probably already know it. The cameo featured the 11th Doctor, from phoning from Trenzalore. Now, to me, I rather liked it. I thought it was a nice subtle touch, linking the future to the past, so it was very nice. I think it was sort of necessary to be put in, because if we remember back to the 4th of August 2013, we had a lot of, Peter Capaldi had a lot of a backlash saying, oh, he's too old. So I think having Matt Smith sort of there saying, it's okay, he's the Doctor, basically reassuring the fangirls, basically, that Peter Capaldi is the Doctor. And of course, Matt Smith was his humorous self. A lot of people say that it sort of took the shine off Capaldi, but Stephen Moffat said in the Q&A, also, I think I remember in an interview or something, Capaldi was sort of fine about it. He was all for it to have Matt Smith in it. So personally, I think the cameo was sort of necessary, but just to address the sort of age gap with Capaldi. Deep Breath was very risky, with some very risky scenes. Of course, it was past the watershed, so you can sort of forgive it, with Strax basically about to attempt suicide and the half-faced man on the spire of Big Ben. Also, the story does have a few plot holes, such as the dinosaur itself, or the T-Rex, was destroyed by combustion, and the Clockwork people, or the Clockwork droids, wanted to get the optic nerve, but in doing the process, they basically burnt the whole dinosaur, making them not be able to get the optic nerve. And also, Clara herself, she's seen all the Doctors, she's been in his time stream, so surely she knows the concept of regeneration, and she's seen all the versions of the Doctor. That's my only sort of gripe from the story, but the story itself had the right balance of humour and darkness, with especially the darkness being in the final 10 minutes, and the Clockwork droids being sort of a space Burke and Hare, as Clara put it. Capaldi himself was funny, of sort of addressing his appearance, and I have to say, the scene I find most thrilling with Capaldi and most humorous with Capaldi is probably with the tramp played by the late Elizabeth Sladen's husband, which I think is nice that the show is dipping into its past, even though it's not technically a reference from a Doctor Who story. but it's a reference from a Doctor Who character. And I also have to say, Capaldi was on fine form, all the cast were on fine form, and I have to say, when Capaldi was sort of translating the T-Rex's thoughts, you could easily think that he's addressing himself, you know, that he's alone and the world shook before him, and you could easily say that he's talking about the Time War. You know, that everything was so bright and now it's all grey because of all the dust and smoke from the Dalek fire. And also when he's talking to the Clockwork, the half-faced man, you know, that you are a broom, you know, you replace the brush, then you replace the handle, you know. Is it the same brush? No, that sounds like he's talking about himself, you know, that he can change a face, you know, he's still, you know, he's still got the identity of the Doctor, but the whole physicality and the physical appearance of the Doctor has changed. So I'm going to rate Deep Breath 7 or an 8. I'm going to go 7.5 eyebrows out of 12. No, not out of 12, out of 10. Yeah, let's go for 7.5 eyebrows out of 10. So yeah, Deep Breath was a good opener. Not the strongest new series opener for me, and it's certainly not the worst new series opener. My favourite is the 11th Hour, then it's probably Deep Breath, and then it's Rose, and then the Christmas Invasion. So this has been my review of Deep Breath. Hopefully you guys have enjoyed it, and hopefully I will review Into the Dalek. So yeah, thank you very much for watching, and goodbye. Attack eyebrows.